I think our gospel gives a very good illustration of religious moral culture. Our reading, Mark 3, verses 20 to 35, in it we find three criticisms made of Jesus. The first is that he's out of his mind, and the second that he was possessed by a demon, and the third was that he was casting out demons by the power of the chief demon. Now, I don't mean these insults or personal attacks are what make religious moral culture, but rather that Jesus' reply to the first criticism, or his response to those who came out to restrain him because people were saying that he was out of his mind, that is what illustrates religious moral culture. But I need to go through his replies to the other two criticisms first. The second and third criticisms came from the scribes. The first is a number of people we don't know who made the charge that he was out of his mind. Okay, so the scribes, they too came out from Jerusalem to protest Jesus. Some call it protest, others would just call it insult and hate. They said Jesus casts out demons by the power of the chief demon. Basically, the scribes said that Jesus was in league with Satan. Oddly, however, their attack implies that Jesus was actually effectively exorcising demons from individuals. He was getting the job done. They were just trying to say he did it in an underhanded way, which meant that he was in league with Satan. Jesus' reply was very straightforward. He basically said, nonsense. So let me rephrase it in an analogy to try to make the point and something that we might understand. Eliot Ness, many of you will know, it was a Prohibition lawman from 1929 to 1933. He and his untouchables took down Al Capone in Chicago. So now imagine 1932, 1933, when this was done. The defund the police mob were very upset with Eliot Ness and the untouchables, and they wanted to take down Eliot Ness. They wanted to deplatform him, to get him fired and get him defunded. So they said, Eliot Ness has been using Al Capone to take down the mob. He was in league with Al Capone this whole time. The next day, the newspapers read the reply from Eliot Ness, and he says, how can Al Capone take down Al Capone? No one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Basically, Al Capone would never take part in his own downfall. And this is a given. This is obvious. And Jesus says this same point of Satan. He would never be involved in his own downfall. So it's nonsense that he could exorcise Satan by the power of Satan. The other charge from the scribes was dealt with even more abruptly, more quickly. They said that Jesus was demon-possessed. The words were, he has Beelzubul. Now, for many people, that doesn't mean anything. It's an odd kind of insult. But Beelzebul was another name for the chief demon. And we find this word in 2 Kings. And you might have heard the English translation or reading of this word in the phrase, the Lord of the Flies. It was a book by William Golding. And another name, another way of translating Beelzebul is also to say what the flies are on. This was the king of dung. The rebuttal that Mark gives has Jesus simply highlighting the seriousness of the insulting, the blaspheming. I know it's not common now to worry about blaspheming, at least not in most Western countries. But this deliberate and exaggerated antagonism, Jesus says, has consequences. It's not business as usual. It is not just the rough and tumble, irrational politics of the toxic mob mentality, which is so common you might even think it's normal nowadays. In fact, I think we do think so. The people who were the spokespersons of this blaspheming were actually the spokesmen of God, the scribes. And that's at the heart of the problem here. Jesus' rebuke amounts to saying such blasphemy is liable to eternal consequences. So just watch your mouth. I think the more important and the more shocking reply we read about is to those or about those who came out to restrain him, because everyone was saying that he had gone out of his mind. People were saying this in public, and we don't know if it was just the scribes or the people that they encouraged to speak up, or, what was the real on-the-ground politics here. We don't know. People were saying it, and some people came out to restrain Jesus. Now, I confess that when I read this in church, I reintroduced the ambiguity that's found in the Greek that is cleared up in the English translations, virtually all of them, because it doesn't say who actually went out to restrain Jesus in the beginning passages. It says his people, his envoys, his associates went out to restrain him. Who were they? It doesn't say there. What we do find is that in verse 31, we know who was coming out to restrain Jesus. And verse 31 says, then Jesus' mother and brothers came. There should be some shock in suddenly finding out that it was his family who wanted to restrain him. So what's going on? Jesus is facing all kinds of nasty verbal attacks. It's, modern politics, it's ancient politics, it's this garbage stuff that goes on. And it seems his family was either ashamed or very worried for Jesus, that they wanted to take Jesus away and, put him in a rubber room. Maybe not just take him away to keep him safe, but to restrain him, to put him in restraints. Jesus' reaction suggests that he didn't think that their coming out was for protection. And this is how it comes up. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, your mother and your brothers are outside, asking for you. And he replied, who are my mother and brothers? And looking at those who sat around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. Whoever does the will of God is my brother, sister, and mother. To me, this epitomizes religious moral culture, this saying. And this, I think, is the most challenging part of our gospel today. Not the political wrangling that takes up more than half of it. Fellow religious believers trump the reactions, the shame our families might experience about our religiosity, about our religious conviction. Those who do the will of God, they are our people. Now, I realize that anything trumping family is a huge pill for most people to swallow in our day. So I would like to look at this from the side, from the history, and point out 3 other religious moral cultures and to contrast them to see what is unique about this religious moral culture that Jesus is talking about. I'm using Harry Redner's description of what he takes to be 4 pure cultures of morality across history, world history, not Western history, but world history. Honor culture, duty culture, civic culture, and religious culture. So I'll go through each of these, give you some examples, and then end with what makes religious culture so unique. Honor culture is about upholding good form. The saying that captures honor culture is manners maketh man. Not morality, but manners, custom. Honor is behaving well, keeping up the customs, and shame is betrayal of those customs. It's a loss of honor, status, membership, and in some places, life. It is arguable that Jesus' family was motivated by a perceived loss of status with everyone around them, according to what they could see, saying that Jesus was out of his mind. And they're like, oh no, what's going to happen to us? We need to stop this shameful behavior. In many ways, if we look at Jesus' ministry, he disregarded the honor system of the day on and on, from speaking to the wrong people, speaking in the wrong places, inviting the wrong people, talking about the seats of honor and putting those who are dishonored in them, totally upending the honor-shame culture that was in his surroundings. Now, honor culture is typically aristocratic, and you'll still find this today among the wealthy and the plutocrats. And you'll also find it among the military. And this is true now as it was in history. So some examples in our Western history, the classic example of honor and shame are the medieval knights and ladies and the court romance, 1100 to about 1200 AD. Chivalry in romance, honor in battle. We had honor culture in the West for sure. In the East, they have had it too and still do. Persians, Arabs, Turkish. And I'll only mention the name of it and not talk about it, for it deserves no support. Honor killing. Literally killing someone who the family deems has shamed them. I don't think this is what Jesus' family was going to do, but this is a reality of an honor-shame culture. This is something that happens. Now, in the East, it was the Japanese samurai who had a very similar honor-shame culture. They had ethics of chivalry. This is from about 1600 to late 1800s. So, honor-shame culture. We can understand it. And Harry Redner says this is a pure form of one moral culture. There are three other ones. So, duty culture. Duty culture is different. It's rooted in a large-scale hierarchy. This is what makes it not honor, shame, and not wealth and military, but a hierarchy. It's a fixed social order, and there are elite, and then there are the plebs, and sometimes there's different distributions in between. Ethics in this culture is decided by the officials, and then it's imposed on the people. The people are told what's moral. Now, typically, the populace would rather follow their own customs, whatever they were, local as they were, parochial as they were. They follow their family mores. That's what they would want to do. Yet, duty culture says duties are to be performed regardless, irrespective of your personal interest and your particular culture. Duties are universal. That's the nature of this culture. It's an impersonal ethic. It's instrumental, and it's impassive. It's not about wanting to do it. It's about doing it. There's no try, only do. The oldest example of duty culture is Confucianism from the 5th century to the 4th century BC. And the leaders there claimed to be preserving cultural values that were 1,500 years old. Now, what can be said is that it is the most successful integration of elite definition of values and the people's customs, integrating duties and customs together into a actual lived culture of a people, the whole hierarchy of people. A less successful approach at duty culture was Stoicism, which was 4th century BC to 2nd century AD, Roman culture, much less successful. Never really integrated the lower classes. It was something that emperors believed. Marcus Aurelius, for example, was a Stoic, but it didn't filter down. And then closer to home, from about the 17th century even to the present, there's a whole, and we talk about it as a philosophy, but it's a moral culture that grows around it too. Utilitarianism. And this is the view that absolutely disregards all custom, rejects, doesn't try to integrate with other customs. It just rejects the common ways and says it must be done this way. It must be efficient, greatest happiness for the greatest number, whatever the calculus is, whether it's explicit like that or implicit. There must always be safe spaces, for example. Third, civic moral culture is also a very different and pure system. We can clearly differentiate it from the three others. This is the bloom of ancient Greece. This is Spartan culture from 900 to 192 BC. This is Athenian culture from 500 to 322 BC, thereabouts. It's captured in a famous book that most people have heard about at the very least, and that's Plato's Republic, 375 BC. Civic moral culture means that the morality of the city and the morality of the people are one. There's no separation of elite and pleb. There's no separation of honor, shame. This is what we do. Democracy is the way of the people. And same with the morality. The demos is the people. Now, a modern phrase that I don't know if it's been given earlier, but it fits with the Republic. This is the saying that captures civic moral culture. Statecraft is soulcraft. The way of a healthy state is the way of a healthy soul. They're one and the same, though different. They mutually support one another. They mutually need one another. They are the way it should be. That's civic moral culture. Now, we should know this, actually, not because we like history or we're fans of Sparta or what have you, but because our very own liberal democracy, after the failure of the wars of religion, took inspiration from Greece in what they decided to do, and they emphasized the consent of the governed over against the royalty, kings and queens. They argued for limited government over against absolute power. They argued for a free society over against an elite. This is liberal democracy at its beginnings. Let me use one story to foreshorten the distance in history to try and link some of these views together. In ancient Greece, there's a man named Socrates, and he got into trouble because he used to like to test his peers' claims to truth. People said that he knew all kinds of stuff, and he said, "Oh, tell me about it. I love to learn." And every time he examined them, he found them wanting in definition, consistency, moral integrity, no manner, unlimited manners of ways in which he found them wanting. Maybe that was why the youth loved him, because he stood up to these blowhards. Hard to say. Did they love him because he thought for themselves and they saw something in him? Hard to say. He loved his city, but there was a problem. The Democratic Republic of Athens, the city-state of Athens, for them, vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. Very different. For Socrates, the voice of God was to him a voice that spoke to him personally. And what he said that this voice said, it was a voice of falsehood, meaning whenever there was something that didn't smell right, didn't seem right, wasn't logical, that voice would say something, say, no. And so he wouldn't assent to the falsehoods around him. And he did this because he had a divine voice. He heard something. But this voice was not the voice of the people. It was many of the leaders of the people that he found making mistakes, according to him. And he would make them look foolish because they stumbled over what they had to say. So they put Socrates on trial. And you know how many people were in the trial? You know, we have 12 in our trials, right? And so that's representative of the people. Just think of a much smaller total population. What would be more representative? Everyone would be more representative, the most direct vote. But look at it this way. There were 500 jurors at Socrates' trial. 500, not just 12, hand-picked, strategically picked by lawyers. 500. Very hard to manipulate that. So the people got to speak. And the charges were Socrates was corrupting the youth, and he didn't believe the gods of the city. Which was more important, the first or the second? Well, Socrates lost his trial and his life. But this gives us a window into what religious moral culture has to come up against. The idea of a truth that runs counter to the human culture that's going on offers a different moral culture. Religious moral culture is rooted in something outside the elite, outside the people. It's rooted in divine ways. That's the bold claim. And that's what people can object to. Yes, that's at the heart of it. Maybe they don't agree. Fine, but that's what it is. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Leviticus 19:18. This is not something someone came up with. It is believed to have been told by God. Love the stranger. Deuteronomy 10:19. Love God with all thy heart. Deuteronomy 6:5. These are statements by God to the people. Do this. Morality becomes a whole way of life. And the information And reflection on that maybe comes from prophets and priests, but neither prophet nor priest make it up. It wasn't the elite coming up with morality and then telling people what to do. It was them being told and them saying, do I have to? Yes, tell other people. And so they put themselves as messengers of God. Priests would talk about doctrine to firm things up, and it would be preserved, disseminated, but they didn't make it up either. They might have made up the wording. The wording might change in history and be better nuanced, but what they're trying to capture is a truth that's outside of history, but understood within it, within history. The source of truth is outside of individuals and society. That's the bold claim of religious moral culture. How does it become real? It's not distant. It's not absolutely foreign. We have moral sense. We can come to understand it. We make choices, and there are consequences to our choices. We learn by engaging with our intent and the consequences of them. And we have a conscience where we can evaluate whether it was good. We can evaluate other perspectives. We can think these things through, and we can integrate a standard that we didn't come up with. Isaiah speaks for God. Remove the evil things. Remove the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. And it is so easy, I think, how easily religious moral culture comes up against conflict with family systems, power systems, other moral cultures. It can come in conflict with the social hierarchy at a drop of a hat. It competes for power for sure. The aristocrats, the elite, they don't like it. And many of the common people are of a similar view. They want to make it up themselves. Both of them, the elite and the common. Religious moral culture says, not what we're on about. Religious moral culture says that we are shaped best by truths that are beyond us, not of our making. Truths that are bigger than the state, bigger than the church. Truths that are more important than any of the social influencers, whether they're hereditary or TikTok-y types. Truths that are deeper than even our own upbringing. And we've learned a few of those. If you've ever strived for a standard outside your family's customs and suffered for it, or if you've strived to uphold godly ways with loved ones and friends and got blowback, then you know that you're not alone. And this is sadly a natural part of religious moral culture. Upholding a standard that you didn't make. Religious moral culture has always had to negotiate a divine moral standard and diverse moral cultures in which it has been given. Religious moral culture does not impose faith and morality like state rule. Religious moral culture is not fixated on status, prestige, honor, and shame. Sadly, we've seen both these types of moral culture infect church life, but that's not its true moral culture. Religious moral culture may and does come in conflict with family and civic customs and traditions. So I end with this observation. The other Gospels, but not Mark, the other Gospels and our tradition tells us that Jesus' family came around. They saw differently and moved beyond the honor-shame culture. Jesus' mother and brothers saw through the honor-shame culture to appreciate Jesus' divine message and witness, and perhaps seeing it at one with their Jewish tradition, a new covenant. So may we all find harmony in our religious callings, individual and collective, and our communities and our families. For that is what we would want, both personally and what is called for by God.